is spreading in Russia. But don't worry, Vladimir Putin is here. At his big speech in Sochi, Putin told Russian people that the Western countries are suffering while Russia is booming. This is all thanks to 30,000 sanctions that the West slapped on the Russian economy. But you see, Putin's actions are not really lining up with his words. If the economy was doing well, why is Putin stealing billions from oligarchs? If the economy is doing well, why is every single metric published by the Russian central bank negative? You see, everything in the economy is going down. Car sales, down. Oil and gas revenue, down. Trade with countries like China, down. Now, to be fair to Putin, there are few industries that are just booming in Russia. Russia is about to become the country with the biggest crematorium in the world. You know a business is making too much money when they start spending on stupid ads. Like, why is a coffin company in Moscow advertising with models? They got too much money. But anyways, let's get into why and how Putin is seizing billions from oligarchs that he built himself. But before that, I want to show you guys the clip of him at the Sochi event where he's bragging about the Russian economy. Let's watch.
You know how much efforts our opponents have taken in recent years in order to, let's put it blatantly, push Russia out of the global system and drive us into political, cultural, informational isolation, and economic autarky. By the number and scope of punitive measures imposed on us, which they ashamedly call sanctions, Russia has become the absolute record holder in world history. 30,000 or perhaps even more restrictions of every kind imaginable. So what? Did they achieve their goal? I think it goes without saying for everyone present here, these efforts have completely failed. Russia has demonstrated to the world the highest degree of resilience, the ability to withstand the most powerful external pressure that could have broken not just one country, but an entire coalition of states. And in this regard, we feel a legitimate pride. Pride for Russia, for our citizens, and for our armed forces. But I would like to speak about something deeper. It turns out that the very global system they wanted to expel us from simply refuses to let Russia go. Because it needs Russia as an essential part of the global balance. Not only because of our territory, our population, our defense, technological and industrial potential, or our mineral wealth. Although, of course, all of these are critically important factors. But above everything else, the global balance cannot be built without Russia. Neither the economic balance, nor the strategic balance, nor the cultural or logistical one. None at all. I believe those who try to destroy all of this have begun to realize it. Some, however, still try stubbornly to achieve their goal, to inflict, as they say, a strategic defeat on Russia. Well, if they cannot see that this plan is doomed to fail and persist, I still hope that life itself will teach a lesson, even to the most stubborn of them. They've made a lot of noise many times, threatening us with a complete blockade. They've even said openly, without hesitation, that they want to make the Russian people suffer. That's the word they chose. They've drawn up plans, each more fantastical than the last one. I think the time has come to calm down, to take a look around, to get their bearings, and to start building relations in a completely different way.
You see, this Russian oligarch owned one of the biggest food companies in Russia, and now it's Putin's company. That's because in Russia, oligarchs have to follow one rule. Your money is Putin's money, and Putin's money is Putin's money. But anyways, let me actually explain to you what the reason was for Putin to take over this company. According to Putin's lawyers, this company, which makes billions of dollars in Russia every single year, is transferring that money to overseas accounts in Australia and the United States. You know, countries where governments don't just take over the money you have. But for Putin, this was unacceptable because these countries are supplying weapons to Ukraine, and that means you cannot transfer money to these countries. And that's the reason Putin's lawyers gave for taking over this company. Very, very logical. The real reason, as all of us know, is very simple. Putin needs money to keep his war machine going, and he's gonna get it any way possible. That's why the lawyers are not even trying to come up with a legal reason behind why they are taking over companies. They're just making up stuff like Charlie from It's Sunny in Philadelphia. This kind of stuff is actually only gonna go up in coming months because all the traditional revenue streams that Putin and his oligarchs had before this war are drying up very, very quickly. Just recently, we saw an announcement from Russia that I'm betting many people here never thought they would actually see in their lifetime. Russia will begin importing gas from China after 40% of Russian refining capacity is offline because of Ukrainian sanctions. This means we cannot call Russia the gas station of the world anymore. We need a new nickname. This is just yet another example of Putin delivering on a promise he made to the Russian people. As he promised, they are no longer China's gas station. But there's always a twist. For Russia, this is a big hit because as you guys already know, Russia really depends on crude oil and oil product exports to get the money that the country needs. Now this is where I want to explain a little bit what this situation is because many people misunderstand it and they comment down below that, hey, Russia is still exporting oil. And you guys are correct, whoever is commenting that. In fact, Russian crude oil exports have actually gone up. That's because crude oil is what refineries use to refine it into final oil products. But since Russian refineries cannot refine the crude oil anymore, they're just exporting more crude oil. And they are not exporting oil products. This includes gasoline or anything that's refined from the crude oil. They have to import those kind of products. This actually does create a financial problem because even though crude oil is making money for Kremlin, the oil products were a lot more profitable because the margins were a lot more when they were exporting oil products instead of just crude oil. So the profit margin that Kremlin was making on its oil exports has gone down, and that's not taking in consideration that they now have to spend more money buying up oil products like gasoline from countries like China. Now, of course, this is not something Kremlin is going to do from their own pockets. This cost is just going to get passed down to customers who are buying oil for their car or for anything else they need. But luckily for Russian customers, they might not have to worry about that as much because Russian car sales are taking a nosedive. In fact, the car sales in Russia fell by almost 20% in the month of September. And the problem is even more extreme if you look at more specifically Russian automakers. Russia's largest automaker, Avtovaz, saw the sales decline by almost 25% in the month of September. This is just yet another example of Putin delivering on promises he made. He said he will rebuild the Soviet Union, and he's doing it in front of our eyes. Soon, Russians will have to wait 10 years for a car to be made because there's gonna be no industry left inside the country. This reminds me of a joke former President Ronald Reagan made.
You know, there's a 10-year delay in the Soviet Union of delivery of an automobile. And only 1 out of 7 families in the Soviet Union own automobiles. There's a 10-year wait. And you go through quite a process when you're ready to buy, and then you put up the money in advance. And this happened to a fella, and this is their story that they tell, this joke. That this man, he laid down his money, and then the fella that was in charge said to him, okay, come back in 10 years and get your car. And he said, morning or afternoon? And the fellow behind the counter said, well, 10 years from now, what difference does it make? And he said, well, the plumber's coming in the morning.
The Soviet Union is coming back, and it's coming back in a very unique way. You see, in Russia, companies are not allowed to lay off workers because that would look bad for Vladimir Putin and the economy he's trying to show off. That means instead of laying off workers, companies are just cutting down on days they work. From a 5-day work week, now some companies are only offering 4-day work weeks. This way, companies don't have to pay as much to the workers, and they can pretend that Russian employment is still sky high. The problem with this system is that workers have to do a lot more in a shorter period of time, all the while getting paid less. You guys can see how this will lead to problems, right? The equipment in these car companies are not being kept up properly, which is leading to a lot of problems, which leads to sales going down and, of course, businesses running out of money. This is exactly what's happening with Russian car companies. The biggest one did something like this a week ago, and now we have the second biggest car company laying people off after trying out this shortened work week innovation. Now, after hearing all this, it may seem like almost every industry is going down the gutters in Russia. But that's not true. There is one business that's just booming. Ukraine war means one part of the economy is booming, and that's funerals. As casualties mount, Russia's funeral industry sees record growth. Now, the funniest part of all this is these figures are being published by the Russian state media, all the while Kremlin is refusing to accept that Russia has suffered 1 million casualties on the front lines. But let's get into these figures. According to Russian outlet, the country's funeral service market surged 13% in the first 4 months of 2025, with nearly 200 new businesses opening to meet this demand. Personally speaking, I didn't know countries kept these kind of records, but listen to these stats. Coffin prices rose 9% in April, and grave digging cost jumped 15%. The way these businesses are growing, I have a feeling that private equity will start buying up funeral homes very soon in Russia.
So I wanted to just get some answers about the Russian mindset. Because we see these numbers and I think they will never fly here in the Western world, but Russia is so different. Russian army is experiencing 20,000 soldiers deaths every single month. In total, they have experienced 1 million casualties. Half of those people cannot return to the front line. That's how bad the injuries are. And it seems like Putin doesn't care. But like just from a human point of view, there has to be a point where Russian citizens start to care at the rate where Russia is losing its young men and, just men in general. Maybe I'm naive. I don't understand the Russian mindset.
Not naive, but if Russian history is any guide to us, so you can learn that any positive outcome of the war always strengthens the regime, the ruling class. Whether it was the Napoleonic War in 1812, or World War II, or the Russian-Turkish War in 1877, 1878. So victory was always, the big push for the regime. And Russians never cared about the price. I mean, World War II was a disaster. I mean, this is the losses. It's just and the quality of the management, war management in the beginning of the war, it's just terrible. But the outcome was victorious, and nobody cared. And even today, we still, see Putin regime speculating on the World War II as the greatest accomplishment. By the way, this is if you start asking Russians about World War II, many of them, especially young ones, would not even recall that America and British Empire were just, were allies. And without America's lend-lease, Russia would not survive the first year of the war. But it's being lost. So this is, we won, we. The rest is just, it doesn't matter. So it's a total historical ignorance, but it's a pride that we won. Now, on the other side, every loss, and whether we go to the Crimean War of the middle 19th century, 1853, 1856, where the coalition of Britain, France, and Turkey defeated Russia and just, actually in Crimea on Russian soil, that led to the long-awaited reforms to abolish serfdom, and also you may argue that Alexander II's reforms in 1861, 1860 in 1860s were the most profound liberal reforms ever in Russia. Then you can look at Russia-Japanese War in 1904-1905, another loss, and revolution in Moscow, and then it's the riots, they were all over Russia, and then the monarchy had to make a big concession. We got constitutional monarchy. 1917, stalemate after World War I, and Russia was not doing well. Disaster, regime collapsed. War in Afghanistan, and the clear defeat in a Cold War, collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's not enough to scare Russians with the losses. And also, that don't forget, is for many Russians that are being sent to the front line, there are not so many options left. Putin is skillfully avoiding mobilization of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Those two cities are almost untouched. You don't want, Putin doesn't want any potential, not only riots, but just, it's the
Issues.
malcontent just in two major cities. It's like it's megapolises. So if you look at the Russian army, part of this is I've been recruited from jails, from prisons. Part of this from national republics. Part from the very depressed regions. So people being paid relatively well, and it's for the families. We lost one, but we got more money than we could imagine. So it's not going to last forever. So I agree with you. There's a critical mass. Putin can run out of money. That's, by the way, that's another problem. That's to pay enough to compensate for the losses. Again, he may not have enough. Just desperate man to go there, but he still has power. So he has access to manpower. What could be far more dangerous for Putin, and that's what I've been advocating for, and unfortunately it was never picked up by the Western powers, is to go after brains. You need brain drain. Putin may have a few million extra soldiers for the front line, but he has a very small reserve of engineers, computer experts, financiers, and just simply offering them an opportunity to leave Russia. And many of them, by the way, tried to leave in 2022, but Europe and America said, no, we don't need it. You go back. So there's no visa stuff. So I've been working with some of other members of Russian opposition, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and we suggested a simple declaration. We did it in Berlin, called Berlin Declaration. It's a long text, but it has three key components. Somebody who wants to leave Russia must publicly acknowledge that the war is criminal, regime is illegitimate, and Crimea is Ukraine. As long as you sign a declaration, you become a criminal in Russia. You can no longer stay there. And then you have a chance to move elsewhere. And most of the people that would take this chance, they're exactly from these categories: engineers, computer experts, financiers. They don't need. They're not refugees from Syria or Afghanistan. So those are people who could actually make a contribution to the society. And that's what I call, half jokingly, Russian Taiwan. So how about just taking these people and weakening Putin's war machine? Because you need engineers. So that's maybe a few 100,000 people of that type. And Putin's war machine would not stop, but would not be working with the same deadly efficiency.
No, that's definitely
But
interesting.
to do it, you have to put your strategic goal to win the war. And it's like Winston Churchill said, thanks for bringing him in. So it's victory. It doesn't matter. We have only one goal, victory. Nobody, neither Biden nor Trump nor European leaders, nobody is willing to say the word victory. It's always, how can we get out of this mess?